What if a man powered by a yellow sun awoke beneath twin moons, where the sun itself is an executioner, and destiny is written not in light but in spice? The wind screams first, not the gentle whisper of a Kansas field, not the metallic howl of metropolis between towers, but a living roar, ancient and starving. Sand slams into a blue and red form like thrown knives. A body crashes across a dune hard enough to crack stone, yet the man at its center barely feels pain. What he feels is wrongness. The sun above him is white-hot, merciless, burning through the sky like a judgment. Its light doesn't nourish him the way Earth's yellow sun does. It presses, it weighs, it feels hostile. Superman opens his eyes. For 30 heartbeats, he doesn't move. His senses stretch outward instinctively, and what they touch makes his breath slow. No cities, no oceans, no electromagnetic hum of a living world. Just endless sand, layered with echo-zangent deaths, buried machines, something vast, moving far below the surface. His hearing catches a rhythm under the wind, deep and titanic, like the heartbeat of a god trapped underground. His vision pierces the horizon and finds nothing but dunes folding into infinity. "Where am I?" he murmurs, his voice nearly torn apart by the gale. He reads eyes cape snapping like a wounded banner, and the sun above him flares brighter as if responding. Instinctively, he absorbs its light, but instead of strength flooding his veins, there's resistance. Power still answers him, immense and controlled, but it feels strained, like lifting a planet through water. His cells drink, yet the energy is harsher, sharper, not yellow, not red, something else, something older. Clark Kent closes his eyes and focuses, searching for Earth, for Lois, for the familiar gravitational song of home, and nothing answers. Space itself feels different, folded, bent by rules he doesn't recognize, and beneath that, threaded through everything, like an invisible nerve, is another presence, a pressure, a whisper just beyond hearing. Spies. He doesn't know the word yet, but his body reacts before his mind does. A shiver runs through him, not of weakness, but of awareness. Time stutters for half a second. In that fracture, he sees flashes, burning cities carved from stone, human figures with glowing blue eyes, banners snapping over armies chanting a single name. His own symbol reflected in countless futures, some revered, some feared, some drenched in blood. Clark staggers back, shocked, as the vision collapses. "Oh, Kay," he says quietly, grounding himself. "Focus, assess, protect." The words are muscle memory, a creed forged across 1,000 rescues. Whatever world this is, people live here. That means it needs help. He takes a step under sand, explodes. A tremor ripples beneath his feet, racing outward faster than sound. Far away, dunes begin to collapse inward, as if something massive is turning beneath the surface. Superman's hearing spikes, catching a sound so deep it vibrates in his bones. Not a roar, a summons. He lifts into the air, hovering just above the sand, scanning, and then he sees it. A shadow moving beneath the desert, longer than cities, curving with terrible grace. The sand itself flees before it. Every instinct he has screams danger, not to him but to everything else. And in the distance, barely visible through the heat haze, he spots them. A small procession crossing the open desert, fragile, human. Their footsteps are irregular, panicked. They don't know what's coming. Superman doesn't hesitate. He rockets forward, air cracking behind him like thunder. As he flies, that whisper returns, louder now, brushing against his thoughts. Not a voice, but a suggestion. Savior, tyrant, God. The desert answers his passage with fury. The massive presence beneath the sand turns, redirecting, drawn not to the humans but to him, to the impossible thing that dares to fly above Arrakis unclaimed. Superman slows midder as understanding begins to dawn, cold and sharp. This world is not passive. Its destiny fights back. And somewhere, far across the dunes, a young man with spice-blue eyes pauses, gasping. As visions, not his own, tear through his mind, visions of a man falling from the sky like a living sun. Two paths have just collided, and only one of them was written. What happens when a world built to worship prophecy senses a being who is never meant to exist within it? The sandstorm breaks as suddenly as it was born, like a beast pulling its claws back into the deep. Superman lands several dozen meters from the travelers, careful, lawless, carefully at the ground still dense beneath his boots. The group freezes instantly. Weapons rise. Not guns, but curved blades, shimmering with a faint, oily sheen. Their movements are disciplined, desperate, trained for death in a place where mercy is a liability. Clark raises his hands slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." They don't lower their weapons. Their eyes lock onto him with a fear that goes beyond the unknown. He hears it in their breathing, tastes it in the way their hearts pound. Not the fear of a man, but of a sign, a disruption. Something their legends warned them about, without ever naming. One of them steps forward, a woman with sharp features and eyes like cut sapphires. Her voice is steady, but her mind is screaming. "You walk without rhythm," she says. "Yet the desert still answers you." "I don't know what that means," Clark replies gently. "But something is coming. Something big. I felt it turn toward us." At the word "coming," panic ripples through the group. Several glance down at the sand, as if expecting it to open and swallow them whole. Clark hears it again, the deep thunder beneath the surface. Closer now. The massive presence coils, curious, offended. The woman follows his gaze. "Maker," she whispers. Before Clark can ask, the sand erupts. A wall of it surges upward, spiraling as if reality itself is being pulled into a vortex. From within that churning cyclone emerges a shape that dwarfs skyscrapers, a segmented titan plated in ancient armor of sand and scale. Its mouth opens, ringed with grinding teeth, wide enough to consume a city block. The sandworm Clark's instincts screamed louder than the storm ever did. He moves. In a blur of force and sound, he rockets upward, grabbing the creature just beneath its massive ringed head. The impact sends shockwaves rippling across the dunes. The travelers are thrown back, barely clinging to life, as the desert explodes around them. Superman strains, muscles screaming not from lack of strength, but from resistance. The worm is not merely physical. It is ritual. It is law. It is the spine of this world's balance, and it does not appreciate being touched. The sun beats down on Clark's back, harsh and unforgiving. Power still flows into him, but it burns instead of comforts. The worm thrashes, its body curling, dragging Clark through the air and slamming him back into the sand with catastrophic force. For the first time since arriving, Clark bleeds. Just a thin line across his brow, but the sight of it sends a shock through every human watching. The woman stares, eyes wide, lips trembling. The dessert draws blood from him. She breathes. He is not invincible. Clark wipes it away, stunned not by the pain, but by what it means. This world's sun is changing him. The spice in the air is doing something to his senses, his perceptions. Time feels loose. As he stands, visions slam into him, uninvited possible futures branching like shattered glass. He sees himself worshipped, statues carved into cliffs. He sees himself hunted, poisoned by conspiracies older than empires. He sees the worm dying beneath his hands, and the universe screaming in response. And then he hears another voice, human, focused, terrified. "Stop." Clark turns just as a young man steps forward, cloak snapping violently in the wind. His eyes are fully blue now, glowing with intensity that borders on the divine. Paul Atreides looks directly at him, not with fear, but with recognition. "You don't understand what you're doing," Paul says, voice shaking as visions crash through his mind. "If you fight it, you break everything." The worm rears again, massive and wrathful, its shadow blotting out the sun. Clark stands between it and the humans, torn between instinct and warning, between saving lives now and dooming worlds later. For the first time in his life, Superman doesn't know which choice is right, and the desert is running out of patience. What if the greatest hero in the universe had to choose between saving lives and preserving destiny itself? The sandworm's shadow stretches over them like a living eclipse, its massive body coiling higher, teeth grinding with a sound like countenance breaking apart. The air vibrates so violently that even Superman feels it in his chest, a pressure that rattles his bones and pulls at something deeper than muscle, something tied to fate. Clark glances at Paul, really looks at him now. The boy is barely more than that yet. His eyes hold centuries, pain, resolve, a future heavy enough to crush stars. Clark hears it in Paul's heartbeat, layered with echoes that don't belong to the present. "You're seeing it too," Clark realizes. "The future's." Paul nods once, sharply. "The desert shows me everything, every path, every death. His gaze flicks to the worm, and in most of them, "You're the beginning of the end." The words hit harder than the worm ever could. The Maker surges again, its body twisting as it prepares to dive, to erase the anomaly that dares to defy its ancient rhythm. The travelers scream. Cliff moves without thinking, grabbing the worm again, but this time, instead of brute force, he changes tactics. He doesn't try to stop it, he redirects. With a thunderous exertion, Cliff shifts the worm's trajectory just enough that it plunges back into the sand several hundred meters away. The impact shakes the desert, dunes collapsing inward like collapsing stars. The presence beneath the surface coils angrily, but it doesn't resurface. Not yet. Silence falls unnatural, heavy. Clark lands slowly, cape settling around him. He turns to Paul. "I won't let people die, but I won't destroy your world either. Tell me what this place is. Tell me why I'm here." Paul hesitates. Every instinct tells him not to answer, not to involve this impossible being. But the futures won't stop screaming, and in too many of them, silence is worse. "This is Arrakis," Paul says finally. "Dune, the only source of spice melange in the universe. It bends space, time, and minds." His voice tightens. "It creates prophets, monsters, empires." Clark feels it click. The whispers, the visions, and it's reacting to me. "Yes," Paul replies softly, "because you don't belong to any of its futures." The woman from earlier, Jessica Clark, will later learn steps closer. Her voice is calm, Bene Gesserit controlled, but her eyes are sharp. "You are an external variable, a singularity. Prophecy cannot contain you." That word prophecy sits wrong in Clark's chest. "Where I come from, destiny isn't a cage. It's a choice." Paul flinches at that. On Arrakis, choice is an illusion created by surviving long enough. Before Clark can respond, a new sound cuts through the air. Engines, heavy, militarized. His hearing tracks them instantly. Ornithopters, slicing through the sky. Approaching fast Harkonnens. Paul says, venom in his voice. They felt the disturbance. Clark looks up, eyes narrowing as the aircraft crest the dunes. Armed men hang from their sides, weapons bristling. Their attention locks onto the group, and then onto him. One of the soldiers laughs over an external speaker. "What in the hell is that?" Clark steps forward, placing himself between the attackers and the Fremen. The sun beats down harder now, its alien light pressing against him, draining more than it gives. He feels at his limits shifting, tightening. A mistake here could cost everything. The lead ornithopter opens fire. Clark moves faster than thought, intercepting the first volley, metal screaming as bullets flatten against his skin. But each impact feels heavier than it should. He can take it, but not forever. Not like this. He looks back at Paul, at the boy who may become an emperor or a monster, and realizes something terrifying. If he stays, he changes everything. If he leaves, millions die. The choice burns inside him as the sky fills with fire. And somewhere in the storm of spice and fate, the universe holds its breath. What if every punch you throw saves lives today, but condemns entire civilizations tomorrow? The first ornithopter explodes midair, torn apart not by heat vision, but by Superman's hands ripping through reinforced alloy, like wet paper. The fireball blooms against the pale sky, shockwaves rattling the dunes. Clark doesn't feel triumph, only dread. His senses scream with overlapping futures the moment the machine dies. Thousands of branching outcomes flare and collapse like dying stars. Paul staggers, clutching his head. "You can't fight them like this," he gasps. "Every time you intervene openly, the paths narrow, the jihad sharpens." Clark hesitates for half a second too long. A second ornithopter fires a missile. Clark intercepts it high above the desert, twisting his body to shield the ground. The detonation slams into him with staggering force, hurling him backward through the sky. He crashes into the sand miles away, carving a trench that glows faintly with heat. For a heartbeat, the world dims. When he rises, he feels it clearly now. The sun of Arrakis is not feeding him. It is burning him alive slowly, like a crucible refining metal through pain. His strength is still godlike, but conditional, time-limited. The spice in the air seeps into his lungs, into his cells, awakening perceptions he never asked for. He sees a future where the Fremen kneel before him, calling him the Sunjin. Another where he lies broken beneath a sky filled with nuclear fire. Another where Paul rules the universe and Superman's symbol is carved into banners of holy war. No, Clark whispers. That's not who I am. He rockets back toward the battlefield just as the remaining ornithopters descend, disgorging Harkonnen troops in black armor. Their eyes widen as he lands among them like a falling star. You stand down, Clark commands, voice carrying across the dunes. Now. They answer with flamethrowers. The fire washes over him, and for the first time in his life, Clark feels pain that lingers. He roars not in rage, but in refusal, and the ground fractures as he leaps, disarming soldiers with blinding speed. Weapons shatter, armor crumbles. He avoids killing blows, always, but the effort costs him. Every restraint tightens the noose of possible futures around him. Jessica watches with cold awe. He fights like a god who fears becoming one. Paul's eyes glow brighter. His visions accelerate, overlapping with clacks in violent harmony. They'll never stop coming, Paul says. Your existence guarantees escalation. Clark grabs a Harkonnen officer by the chest plate and lifts him effortlessly. Then they need to learn fear. Paul shouts. That's how it starts. Too late. Clark hurls the officer into an ornithopter, destroying it. The surviving Harkonnens retreat in chaos, fleeing across the desert. Silence falls again, but this time, it's poison. The Fremen stare at Clark, no longer just wary, reverent, terrified. He is not Lisan or Gabe, one murmurs. He is something else. Clark turns away from them, heart heavy. He feels the desert watching him now, not as prey, but as a rival. The worms stir beneath the surface. The spice thickens in the air, and with it, the visions grow sharper. Crueler. Paul steps closer. If you stay, he says softly, you will become a myth that devours my people. If you leave, House Harkonnen will exterminate us. Clark looks up at the blinding sun, feeling its alien fire drain him further. For the first time since he became Superman, he wonders if saving everyone is impossible, and the universe offers no guidance, only consequences. What if the only way to save a world is to become the thing you've sworn never to be? Night comes to Arrakis without mercy. The heat does not fade, it merely changes its flavor, becoming sharp, invasive, like needles pressed into skin. Clark stands alone atop a high dune, cape wrapped tightly around him as the twin moons rise. Below, the Fremen camp glows faintly with shielded lights, careful not to summon the worms. He can hear them breathing, whispering, praying, not to him, not yet, but the direction of their faith has shifted, and he feels it like a weight around his throat. The spice is stronger at night. It crawls into his senses, prying open doors he's kept locked his entire life. Memories blur with futures. He sees Jonathan Kent standing in a field that isn't Kansas, warning him about power. He sees Lois reaching for him across a gulf of stars. He sees Paul Atreides standing before armies chanting his name as worlds burn in devotion. Clark drops to one knee, fists clenched in the sand. Get out of my head. He growls, not to the spice, but to the idea of inevitability. Behind him, Paul approaches silently, moving with the ease of someone who belongs to the desert. It won't, Paul says. Not anymore. You've changed the shape of things. That's the problem, Clark replies without turning. I'm not supposed to shape them. Paul sits beside him, eyes reflecting moonlight. Neither was I. For a long moment, they sit in silence, two beings crushed under destinies they never asked for. Finally, Clark speaks. On my world, I was sent to lead by example, to show people they can be better. His voice tightens. Here, every example I set becomes law. Paul nods. Arrakis doesn't do symbols gently. A sudden tremor rolls through the sand. Not violent, controlled. Deliberate. Clark's head snaps up. His hearing catches something new. A procession. Heavy machinery. Shielded. Approaching fast. Harkonnen? Clark asks. Paul's expression darkens. No. Worse. The night sky splits with blue-white light as massive transport vessels descend beyond the horizon. Clark's vision pierces the darkness, and what he sees chills even him. Sardaukar, the Emperor's blades. Fanatics, trained from birth to kill without hesitation. They're here for me, Paul says quietly. But you drew them. Clark stands slowly. His body feels heavier than before, as if Arrakis itself is pushing back. The sun's energy within him is thinner now, stretched taut. He can still fight, but not endlessly. How many? Clark asks. Enough, Paul answers. And if they see you fight them, the universe will never forget it. The ground shakes again, stronger this time. The worms feel it too. The spy storm builds on the horizon, a vast wall of glowing orange rolling toward them like judgment. Clark looks at the storm, at the armies, at the fragile camp below. For the first time, the choice in front of him isn't about strength, but about meaning. If he fights, he may save tonight. If he doesn't, he may save tomorrow. Paul meets his gaze. "Tell me," he asks, voice barely above a whisper, "how does a man who can move planets choose to stand still?" The storm surges closer. The Sardaukar advance, and Superman must decide whether hope can survive without force. What if standing still becomes the most dangerous act a god can commit? The first Sardaukar scouts crest the dunes in perfect formation, their movements precise, almost ceremonial. Clark hears their hearts steady, disciplined, utterly unafraid of death. These are not Harkonnen brutes driven by greed. These are believers, killers forged by an empire that worships control. Clark steps forward once, then stops. The spy storm looms now, a colossal wall of burning amber swallowing the horizon. Lightning crackles inside it, not white or blue, but deep violet, as if the sky itself is bruised. Every instinct in Clark screams to act, to intercept, to dismantle, to end the threat before it can touch the Fremen camp. Yet the visions slam into him the moment he leans into that impulse. Armies wearing his symbol, children chanting his name before pulling triggers, worlds burning because a god once decided fear was necessary. He exhales slowly and does something that feels harder than lifting planets. He lowers his hands. The Sardaukar halt when they see him clearly. Murmurs ripple through their ranks. One of their commanders steps forward, helmet marked with the sigils of imperial authority. "That thing," the commander says coldly, pointing at Clark, "is not human." Clark meets his gaze. "Neither are you," he replies, "but you're about to kill people who are." The commander laughs. "People? These are assets, variables, and you," his eyes narrow, "are an anomaly to be erased." The troops raise their weapons. Paul steps forward, voice sharp as a blade. "If you attack him," he says, "you will not survive the night." The commander studies Paul, recognition flickering. "Atreides whelp," he sneers. "You should have died with your house." The storm surges closer, wind tearing at cloaks and armor. The ground vibrates not with the worms yet, but with anticipation. Clark does not move. The first shot rings out. It doesn't hit Clark. A sonic boom splits the air as the blast is intercepted inches from the ground, not by Clark's body, but by the space around him. He has focused, not on destroying, but on containing. The air compresses, bending force aside like water around stone. Bullets curve. Explosions deflect. The Sardaukar fire again and again, confusion creeping into their perfect formation. "He's not attacking," one soldier whispers. "He's letting us choose," another mutters. The commander snarls. "Fire!" Clark feels each impact like a hammer against his soul. The sun's energy inside him thins further, burning instead of replenishing. His vision blurs at the edges, but he holds. He refuses to strike back. Paul watches, stunned, as futures realign. Entire branches collapse not into blood, but into hesitation. Fear spreads not because Clark dominates, but because he doesn't. The spy storm hits. Wind howls with apocalyptic force, sand flaying armor and flesh. Sardaukar formations break as visibility drops to nothing. Screams vanish into the gale. Clef moves then, but only to shield, to guide, to pull soldiers and Fremen alike out of the storm's lethal heart. Jessica stares, breathless. "He's rewriting power," she whispers. "Not through conquest, but restraint." The worms feel it too. Deep beneath the sand, colossal shapes shift not in rage, but in acknowledgement. The desert does not attack Clark now. It steadies him. As the storm begins to pass, the battlefield is gone. No clear victor, no massacre, only survivors, confused, shaken, alive. The Sardaukar retreat, dragging their wounded, their certainty shattered. Clark drops to one knee, exhausted, the alien sun offering no comfort. Paul approaches, eyes blazing not with prophecy, but with possibility. "You didn't become the weapon," Paul says. "You became the question." Clef looks up at the endless desert, feeling Arrakis press closer, more aware of him than ever before. But questions, he knows, terrify empires more than gods. And somewhere far above, Forces older than the desert itself have begun to notice the man who refuses to conquer. What if refusing to rule makes you more dangerous than any emperor ever could? Dawn over Arrakis arrives like a blade sliding across the horizon. The light is merciless, bleaching the dunes into endless gold. And Clark feels it immediately, the sun's alien fire pressing into him again, pulling more than it gives. He stands at the edge of the Fremen camp, watching survivors tend to the wounded, Sardaukar and Fremen alike. Enemies sharing water in stunned silence. That alone feels like heresy in this universe. Paul watches him from a distance, eyes narrowed, visions churning behind that blue stare. The futures are changing faster now, colliding instead of flowing. Where once there were clean, terrible paths, now there are knots, paradoxes, empty spaces where prophecy fails to speak. You broke the pattern, Paul says when he approaches. The spice doesn't know what to do with you. Clark doesn't smile. Neither do I. Jessica joins them, her expression carefully neutral. The Emperor will not ignore this. The Sardaukar retreated without victory. That alone is impossible. She studies Clark like a puzzle that resists every discipline she knows. You've made yourself unavoidable. Clark looks out over the desert. I never wanted that. That, Paul replies quietly, may be why it matters. A low rumble rolls beneath their feet. Not a threat, a summons. Clark feels it echo through his bones, deeper than sound. The worms are closer now, attacking, not fleeing. Curio, they're coming. A Fremen scout whispers. Fear and reverence tangled together. Dozens of them crest nearby dunes, hooks at the ready, but they hesitate when they see Clark. No rhythm, no fear, no offering. Just a man standing in the open, cape fluttering, heart steady. The largest worm surfaces slowly, dwarfing even the others Clark has sensed. Its massive rings rise like a living mountain, its shadow swallowing the camp. The desert falls utterly silent. Paul's breath catches if it attacks. It won't, Clark says, though he doesn't know how he knows. The worm lowers its vast head until it is level with him. Clark feels a pressure in his mind, not a voice, but an awareness. An ancient instinct encountering something outside the closed loop of Arrakis' destiny. For a terrifying moment, Clark sees a future where he fights it, where he wins, where the worms die, and the spice dies with them. He steps back. The worm recoils slightly, then sinks back into the sand, leaving the surface untouched. The ground stills. The Fremen fall to their knees. He walks unclaimed. One whispers. Neither maker nor slave. Word spreads faster than fire ever could. Across Seachers, across trade routes, across the Imperium. A being has come to Arrakis, who cannot be predicted, cannot be controlled, cannot be absorbed into prophecy. And that terrifies the powers that be. High above, aboard a gilded vessel, hidden beyond the atmosphere, Emperor Shaddam IV listens, as reports arrive of storms survived. Of Sardaukar, repelled without slaughter. Of a man who stands beneath Arrakis' sun and does not bow. The Emperor's hand tightens on his throne. Prepare the great houses. He orders, if this thing is allowed to exist, the balance ends. On the surface, Clark feels the shift. The universe, leaning in, testing him. Paul stands beside him, voice low. They're coming in force next time. Politics, armies, assassins. Clark closes his eyes, thinking of Earth, of restraint, of hope. Then I stay, he says. Paul turns sharply. If you do, the story will start revolving around you. Clark opens his eyes, meeting Paul's gaze. They'll make sure it doesn't become a nightmare. Above them, the sky burns brighter, as if the sun itself is watching. And destiny, wounded but not dead, prepares its next move. What if staying to protect a world means becoming the gravity that pulls every war toward you? The first assassination attempt comes quietly. Clark feels it before it happens, or a ripple in the air, a distortion in intent. A needle-thin dart slips out of folded space behind him, moving faster than sound, aimed precisely at the base of his skull. He turns just enough that it glances off his cheek, drawing another thin line of blood before dissolving into vapor, poised and space-folded, designed to kill gods. Jessica stiffens instantly. That wasn't Harkonnen, she says. That was Bene Gesserit. The great houses are already adapting. Paul exhales slowly, eyes unfocused. In some futures, that dart works. Clark touches the blood, staring at it in his fingers. 2 wounds now, Small, insignificant, and yet each one is proof this world can hurt him, learn him, eventually kill him. That can't happen again, Clark says, more to himself than to them. The days that follow blur into tension. Espionage replaces open battle. Saboteurs poison water caches. Ornithopters vanish mid-flight, brought down by forces no one sees. Each incident tests Clark's restraint. Every time he intervenes openly, the visions spike fanatics, spreading his symbol across the stars, holy war justified by his presence. So he changes. He stops appearing in the sky. Instead, he listens, watches moves only when lives will be lost in moments, not wars. He becomes a rumor rather than a banner, a shadow that lifts rubble from a collapsed siege, then vanishes before thanks can be spoken, a silent force that redirects a worm away from a caravan without ever being seen. The Fremen whisper his name anyway, not as a god but as a guardian who refuses worship. That terrifies the Imperium even more. On Catan, the Emperor convenes the Landsrod. Holograms flicker to life, noble faces tight with unease. If he sides with the Atreides, one lord snarls, we are finished. If he destroys the spice, another whispers, civilization ends. And if he rules, a third asks. Silence answers. Back on Arrakis, Paul confronts Clark beneath the moons. You're weakening, Paul says bluntly. I see it. The sun here is killing you slowly. Clark doesn't deny it. I don't need forever, he replies. Just long enough. To do what? To change the rules. Paul's jaw tightens. In many futures, you die before that happens. Clef meets his gaze calmly. Then show me the ones where I don't. Their visions collide, Kryptonian perception meeting prescient awareness. For an instant, time fractures. Clark sees himself standing before the Emperor, refusing a throne. He sees himself imprisoned in a null-field cage, his power bled away. He sees himself choosing to leave, and Arrakis burning without him. Then he sees something else, a narrow path, brutally narrow, where he doesn't conquer, doesn't rule, doesn't save everyone, but prevents the worst futures by becoming a constant uncertainty, a limit on ambition, a reminder that absolute power invites absolute resistance. Paul staggers back, shaken. That path hurts everyone, he whispers, including you. Clark nods. Especially me. A distant explosion blooms on the horizon. Another test. Another crisis engineered to force his hand. Clark turns toward it, cape stirring in the spice-laden wind, feeling the desert's eyes on him. The universe is no longer asking who he is. It is asking how much he's willing to lose. What if the price of preventing a holy war is allowing yourself to be hated by every side? The explosion is not an accident. Clark knows that before the echo fades, he hears the pattern in the shockwave, smells the chemicals laced with spice, senses the calculated timing meant to draw him out. A refugee convoy Fremen and off-world laborers. Alike has been struck at the edge of a canyon where worms cannot reach quickly. Trapped, burning. Clark arrives too late to stop the blast, but not too late to stop the deaths. He moves through fire and debris like a phantom, lifting crushed hulls, sealing ruptured lungs with controlled bursts of heat vision so fine they don't burn skin. He works fast, efficiently, without spectacle. Still, someone sees him. Someone always does. By nightfall, rumors spread again. Not of a savior, but of a manipulator. He let it happen. Voices whisper in sieges and palaces alike. He wants us desperate, dependent. The words cut deeper than blades. Paul confronts him after the wounded are safe. They're turning on you, he says. Both sides. That's not an accident either. Clef stares at the star's distant, distorted points through Arrakis' atmosphere. Good. Paul stiffens. Good. Paul stiffens. Good. If they fear me, they'll try to destroy me, Clark says quietly. And in doing so, they'll expose themselves. Their excess. Their cruelty. He clenches his fists. I can't be their hope. I have to be their limit. Jessica listens from the shadows, her expression unreadable. You're engineering your own downfall, she says. That rarely ends well. Clark turns to her. It doesn't have to end. Just slow things down long enough for people to choose differently. The next strike comes from the Emperor himself. An envoy arrives under banners of peace, bearing gifts, words of conciliation, and a portable null-field generator stolen from forbidden archives. The trap snaps shut the moment Clark steps into the chamber. His connection to the sun is subdued. The spice in the air screams. For the first time on Arrakis, Clark feels truly powerless. Chains clamp around him, humming with exotic energy. The envoy smiles thinly. "You were never meant to be here," he says. The universe is correcting itself. Clark doesn't resist. He doesn't beg. He listens. Outside the chamber, Paul's visions explode into chaos. Futures spiral wildly. Somewhere Clark dies forgotten. Somewhere his execution ignites the very jihad Clark tried to prevent. Paul realizes the truth, too late. This is the convergence point. Clark looks up at the envoy, eyes steady even as weakness drags at him. "If you kill me," he says, "you prove everything I've been trying to show them." The envoy hesitates. That hesitation is enough. The worms stir, the spice set across Arrakis. People begin to ask the question no prophecy prepared them for. What if the monster they fear is the only thing holding their worst instincts back? The chains tighten, the field hums louder, and Clark Kent waits, betting the fate of a universe on the courage of people who have never known mercy. What if the universe finally corners you and all you can do is trust the people you refuse to rule? The null field screams like a wounded animal, its invisible walls pressing inward, stripping Clark of everything that once made him untouchable. His muscles feel heavy, unresponsive. His hearing dulls. The spice-laced air no longer whispers futures, it roars in agony, as if reality itself is offended by the cage around him. For the first time since arriving on Arrakis, Clark feels small. The envoy steps closer, savoring the moment. "You see," he says softly, "even suns can be eclipsed." Klepp meets his gaze without defiance. Only if people believe the darkness lasts. Far beyond the chamber, Paul drops to his knees as the visions hit him like a tidal wave. This moment is everywhere in his mind, branching, collapsing, reforming. In too many futures, Clark dies here, and the galaxy ignites in his absence. In others, Clark escapes, and becomes exactly what he feared. But then Paul sees it. A path not shaped by Clark's strength, but by his absence. Paul rises. "Get me to the Seachers," he orders. All of them. The Bene Gesserit hesitate. The Fremen do not. Across Arrakis, whispers turn into movement. Caravans change course. Hidden tunnels open. Fremen warriors emerge not in worship but in anger. Not for a prophet, but for a line that has been crossed. Back in the chamber, the envoy raises a blade. "History will forget you," he says. Clark exhales slowly. "I hope so." The ground shakes. Not with the rage of a single worm, but with the synchronized movement of many. The null field flickers as massive vibrations ripple through the bedrock. Alarms scream. The envoy's confidence cracks. Outside, the desert has risen. Worms breach the surface in numbers never recorded, their colossal bodies encircling the imperial compound. Shields fail. Structures collapse. Not an attack, an eviction. The Fremen pour in behind them, reclaiming ground never meant to be held. Paul walks at their center, eyes blazing, voice carrying with terrifying clarity. "This world is not yours to cage," he declares. And neither is he. The null field shatters. Clark collapses to one knee as power rushes back, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. He doesn't strike the envoy. He doesn't even look at him. He walks past, toward the light, toward the people who chose to act without his command. Jessica watches, shaken. "You taught them defiance," she murmurs. Kleck pauses, turning back just once. They already had it. They just needed permission. As he steps into the open desert, the sun beats down again, still hostile, still draining, but the worms do not stir. The Fremen do not kneel. Paul stands beside him, the future no longer screaming quite so loudly. "You're still changing things?" Paul says. Clark nods, but not alone. High above Arrakis, the great houses watch in fear as reports flood in, not of conquest, not of apocalypse, but of an empire checked by something it cannot dominate. And Clark Kent looks at the alien horizon, knowing this was never about winning. It was about making sure no one ever could again. What if the ultimate power in the universe discovered that restraint could be louder than destruction? The following days blur into a tense rhythm of observation, subtle intervention, and whispers carried across the desert. Clark moves with deliberate invisibility, using the full measure of his abilities not to dominate, but to protect, to stabilize, to redirect disasters before they erupt. Sandstorms are guided away from caravans. Collapsing sieges are held together just long enough for evacuations. Every act is precise, surgical, and invisible to most, yet seen clearly by the desert itself. Paul watches him constantly, sometimes from a distance, sometimes close enough that their presences brush, like gravities pulling toward each other. You could end wars in a day, Paul says, one night beneath the moons. Yet you don't. Clark gazes at the horizon, the twin moons bathing the dunes in cold silver light, because then nothing would change. People would not grow, they'd only depend. Fear of me would replace courage, obedience would replace choice. That isn't protection, that's tyranny. Paul studies him, his visions flickering in response. And yet, you are still a god. Clark's voice drops. A god who can bleed, who can fail, who can be wrong. That's the difference. That spice hums through the air, resonating with Clark's own senses. Futures ripple, violent possibilities folding in on themselves, no longer as rigid or inevitable. The desert seems to breathe easier. Worms roll lazily beneath the dunes, sensing no threat. The great houses whisper behind closed doors about the anomaly on Arrakis' sunborn, a force that cannot be owned, cannot be worshipped, cannot be predicted. Then, word arrives. The Emperor himself is coming, not with armies, not with Sardaukar, not with diplomacy, but personally, to witness, to test, to see if the being who defied destiny and survived storms, worms, and assassination attempts is real or a myth. Clark and Paul stand on a high dune overlooking Arrakis, watching as the imperial ship descends. Its polished hull glints in the harsh sunlight. The desert seems to tense under its shadow. Paul whispers, "Every eye in the universe will be on you now." Clark nods, feeling the sun's alien rays pierce him not as nourishment, not as harm, but as challenge. "Then they will see a man," he says softly, "who refuses to be a god." The ship lands, and the Emperor steps out, robes shimmering, like liquid gold, eyes calculating every detail, every human, every worm, every ripple of spice. He stops several meters from Clark, studying him like a chessboard come to life. "Say, this is the one who bends prophecy," he says, voice low, but commanding. "You have done what no man or god should. You have altered the flow of inevitability." Clark meets his gaze steadily. "I've only preserved choice." A tense pause. Then the Emperor smiles faintly. "A dangerous idea." And somewhere deep, beneath the sands, the worms stir not in threat, but in acknowledgement. The desert itself seems to recognize that balance has shifted forever. The confrontation does not erupt into violence. Not yet. The universe, it seems, is holding its breath, and Clark realizes that for all the battles fought, for all the lives saved, the real test is only beginning. What if the fate of empires hinged not on war, but on a conversation between two men who were never meant to meet? The Emperor steps closer, each movement deliberate, measured like a predator, circling a prey that is also a predator. Arrakis stretches behind him, dunes, endless, the scented wind carrying faint echoes of distant worms. Clark does not flinch. His cape flutters, a banner of quiet defiance. "You have survived storms, worms, and my Sardaukar," the Emperor says, voice even but heavy with curiosity. "Yet you are fragile, mortal, not a god." "Not really." Clark tilts his head slightly. "I am what I choose to be, and right now, I choose not to kill." The Emperor's lips curve in something close to amusement. "And yet, your presence alone shifts destinies. You are a god without empire, a weapon without orders. That makes you more dangerous than any general, than any duke, than any army I can field." Clark studies him, sensing the calculation behind the words, the infinite possibilities hidden in the folds of the Emperor's mind. Then maybe danger is necessary. If no one can be predicted, then no one can dominate completely. Freedom survives in uncertainty. Paul steps forward beside Clark, eyes glowing with spice-induced awareness. You cannot stay neutral forever. Every move you make, even in action, alters futures. You may think you are saving them from fate, but fate is watching, and it is patient. Clark exhales, feeling the heat of Arrakis' alien sun against his back, the spice-stirring visions deeper than ever. "I don't pretend to control fate, only to ensure people can decide for themselves." The Emperor studies him for long, heavy moments. The desert, too, seems to lean in. Worms stir far below, giant shapes echoing in Clark's senses. The sands themselves wait. Finally, the Emperor speaks. Perhaps restraint is a weapon I've never understood. You teach without rule, protect without conquest. That is unprecedented. Clark shifts slightly, cape catching the wind. It is the only way to survive here, without becoming the monster everyone expects you to be. Paul nods slowly. Then we may have hope. Not through gods, but through people who learn to act for themselves. The Emperor laughs softly, almost inaudibly, but it carries over the dunes like rolling thunder. Very well, Sunborn. Show me what you intend to do next, and perhaps I will learn. Above, the moons gleam coldly. Beneath, the desert sighs. Arrakis, alive, watching, learning, acknowledging a force that defies prophecy, survives storms, bends sand, and refuses to rule. And for the first time, Clark feels that perhaps his greatest victory is not in battles won or enemies defeated, in the quiet, patient power of restraint, and the possibility that hope can exist without domination. The universe has shifted. The deserts whisper of a new balance, and Clark Kent, stranger from another world, stands unclaimed as a god nor tyrant, but something far more dangerous. What if the greatest battle isn't fought with fists, but with the courage to let go? The desert stretches endlessly before Clark now, winds lashing at his cape, sand dancing like fire embers across dunes, gilded by the alien sun. He has spent weeks learning the rhythm of Arrakis as the whispers of spice in the air, the subtle tremors of the worms, the pulse of human ambition and fear. Every day, every intervention, every restraint has left its mark, physically and mentally. Yet despite exhaustion, he feels sharper, more alive than ever. Paul walks beside him, silent for a long moment, eyes scanning the horizon. You've done what no one could, he finally says. You've forced armies, emperors, and even the desert to question themselves. Clark glances at him, voice low. I didn't do it. They did it. I just reminded them what choice feels like. Paul nods slowly, eyes thoughtful. Perhaps that is the difference between a ruler and a savior. One takes power, one shapes it through restraint. Suddenly, the sand trembles more violently than before. The horizon curves as massive shapes breach the surface forms, enormous and unyielding, but unlike any he has felt before. These are not merely beasts, they are the living rhythm of Arrakis, ancient beyond comprehension. They move with intelligence and awareness, drawn to Clark, not in aggression, but in recognition. The Fremen stir behind him, whispering, watching, waiting, and the spice hangs heavy in the air, almost tactile, swirling around him in visions of possible futures. Futures where he rules, where he is worshipped, feared, or hunted. Futures where Paul falls, where the Empire crushes all resistance. Clark breathes deeply. I won't fight them, he says, not like before. Not to dominate, not to prove anything. They exist, and so must the people. Paul studies him, eyes narrowed. And if they attack, then I defend. Clark says simply, not to conquer, not to rule, only to protect, nothing more. The worms move closer, their colossal heads swaying rhythmically, resonating in his chest, vibrating deep in his bones. The desert itself seems to shift beneath him, acknowledging a new balance. The humans around him feel it too, their fear tempered by awe, by understanding that this is a force that cannot be bent, only coexisted with. From a distant dune, the imperial ship descends once more. The Emperor watches, silent, understanding, dawning. He does not order an attack. He does not threaten. He observes, realizing that here stands a being capable of altering fate itself, and yet choosing the hardest path of all, the path of mercy, patience, and restraint. Clark feels the sun on his back, the spice in his lungs, the weight of infinite possibilities pressing at the edge of his consciousness. He closes his eyes for a moment and whispers, I came from a world that taught me to fight every battle. Here, I've learned the hardest fight is knowing when not to. The desert hums, the worms subside, the wind softens. For the first time, Arrakis feels at peace, not conquered, not broken, but alive, aware, and free. And in that moment, Clark realizes the truth he has always carried. The greatest power is not in what you can destroy, but in what you can choose to leave untouched. The sun rises higher, bright and alien, yet no longer threatening. Arrakis watches him, not with fear, but with recognition. And Superman, stranger from another world, stands in the heart of the desert not as God, not as emperor, but as a guardian, a reminder that restraint, courage, and choice can reshape even the harshest worlds. The desert exhales, the spice swirls, the universe waits, changed forever. The end.